The House Appropriations Subcommittee on School Aid in the Department of Education is called to order. Welcome, everyone. Glad you're here with us today and excited to kick off another exciting budget season. First up, will the clerk please call attendance?
Representative Weiss.
Here.
Representative Morgan.
Here.
Representative Kolazar.
Here.
Representative Steckloff. Representative Price is attending via Zoom. Representative Skaggs.
I'm here on Zoom. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Our Price is here as Zoom.
Representative Wilson.
Here.
Representative DeBoer.
Here.
Representative Green.
Present.
Representative Meerman. And Representative Beeson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you.
Representative Skaggs is here on Zoom.
Thank you. Representative
in the nick
Skaggs
of
also
time.
present. And I believe Representative Meerman is walking over as well, so we'll be here shortly. Vice Chair Morgan moves to approve the minutes from May 18th, 2023. Without any objection, the minutes are approved. First up, we have a presentation by the State Budget Office for the fiscal 2025 School Aid Executive Budget Recommendation. And so I'd like to call up Beth Bullion and Alex Holmden from the State Budget Office to present.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. First off, I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity again. It's a pleasure to come before this committee and present the FY25 Governor's School Aid Recommendation. Beth Bullion with the State Budget Office, and I have here with me Alex Holmden. And then I'd also like to recognize Joel Durr, who is behind us. So he was also, they were both instrumental in development of this budget that we have before you. Just a little housekeeping. So I think that you have, all have copies of the slides that we'll be talking through today. In addition to that, we've also provided a hard copy of the school aid highlights. It's just like a 4 or 5 page stapled document, so you should have that in front of you as well. That goes into a little bit more detail than we'll go through today, but we will be talking through the slides. So moving right into the budget, this is a dense chart for the top of the slide deck, but this basically just to kind of show you what we've presented here in the FY24 and FY25 budget. In the FY24 budget, the current year budget, we are proposing about $101 million in school aid fund or changes. These are mostly reflective of cost adjustments that we've agreed to with the fiscal agencies for the January consensus. So changes for things like taxable value, special education, cost, and foundation allowance cost. So that there really are no policy changes reflected in the FY24 changes. In the FY25 budget, the governor is proposing a total of $20.6 billion, $18.3 billion of that is state funds, with an additional $2.3 billion in federal funding. Although the differences in the FY25, the right side of the chart, most of those are red, meaning they're reductions. It's kind of being masked by a couple, what I would say are a couple things. The FY24 budget does contain one-time funding items of about $2.4 billion. And so when we developed the next year's budget, we immediately removed the one-time funded items out. The other thing is some MIPSR savings that we're realizing in the FY25 budget, which I'm sure you've all been hearing about over the course of the last few weeks. So those savings are also largely reflected in the school aid budget. This budget before you actually does contain about $1.9 billion in investments over the baseline budget. The next chart will show the chart pie chart on the left. So this is really the entire $1.9 billion in investments. Nearly 60% of the investments in this budget are focused on the basic operations for schools and targeted learning supports for those students that are most at need. Another 20% is dedicated to student mental health and school safety needs, and then 9% is also dedicated to our early learners or our pre-K students. The chart on the right is just a picture of the budget by fund source. So the total budget is $25.4 billion. Nearly $18 billion, or 70% of that, is coming from the school aid fund. Another $4.8 billion, or 19%, coming from local sources via local property tax revenues, and then another $2.3 billion in federal funds. So the governor's FY25 executive rec for school aid focuses really on three primary areas, and these are really just emphasis of her previous 5 years of budgets. So she is maintaining those priorities into this budget. She's supporting the ongoing funding for basic operations for schools. She is expanding the lifelong learning, so the emphasis on pre-K is some of you just heard in the previous hearing, onto the college guarantee, so the pre-K through 14. So this is really the emphasis of this governor's budget in terms of education. And then thirdly is providing supports to get students the academic supports that they need to succeed in school. This slide here just shows the weighted funding. So the weighted funding model, again, is providing a basic per pupil foundation allowance for schools for operations, and then providing additional funding weights for those students who are most at need. So the governor is proposing a foundation allowance increase of 2.5%, or $241 per pupil. This is, totals $316 million. I should note that the proposed foundation allowance for cyber schools is proposed to be at 80% of the amount of the brick and mortar. And then that last bullet there just shows, consistent with the last few budgets, this governor is also proposing a similar 2.5% increase for all of the weighted funding components. So this includes at-risk, special ed, GSRP per slot allotments, English language learners, career and tech ed, rural and isolated districts, and ISD operations. And the total of that 2.5% for the additional weighted funding components totals about $54 million. One thing this budget is doing that is different from previous budget is the governor is proposing additional weights. So on top of the 2.5%, she is proposing an additional 5% for those high-need weighted funding components, such as English language learners, career and tech ed, and rural and isolated. So additional funding, this essentially kind of closes the gap instead of just treating the foundation and the weighted funding components the same. This narrows the gap somewhat between those. So an additional 5%, total of $125 million here. Of that $125 million, $90 million is being proposed for targeted academic and social, emotional, and physical needs of students. These would be targeted to our highest poverty, highest needs students, and distributed out as grants to applicant districts. In the area of special education, so this budget does continue to support paying special education foundations in addition to the reported costs, so 100%. It's consistent with the current year. It's just that we rolled in some one-time funding as is ongoing so that we can continue to sustain that going forward. In addition to that, in special education, so this budget does propose a revamped formula for the special ed millage equalization formula. This has been a long-standing formula. We've been hearing from the field that that we may, it may be time to look at this. It's a little bit outdated, hasn't been revamped in a number of years. So what we've done is we've added 50 million to the 74 million that's currently in the budget for a total of 124 million. And I would say we've kind of focused on two primary areas. So one is we've kind of evaluated what the total unreimbursed cost for special ed are by ISD. And then we've kind of equalized the local millage against that, such that no ISD would be paying more than a certain percent out of their general fund to offset those special ed costs. So those were kind of the competing goals and priorities with that formula. So in the area of early learning opportunities, as I mentioned in a previous slide, the governor is she has called for in her state of the state, as well as in the budget presentation, universal preschool. So this takes an additional step by funding 6,800 more additional slots for a total of 63.5 million. This budget also includes, we know there are concerns with capacity out there. Obviously, we've been hearing it from the field, hearing it from stakeholders, and hearing it from members as well, that there are a lot of concerns with capacity. So this budget does continue to include 35 million in GSRP startup grants. So these would be things that could be used by those programs and providers to kind of get staff and resources, buildings, space, those types of things up and ready for this fall. So those would be in addition to the per slot allotment. We're also continuing to maintain the 18 million additional dollars that are in the current year budget. It's actually a total of 28 million that's carved out for transportation to help reimburse those costs to get students to and from school. And then those last two bullets, so we're also proposing an additional million for the early on program. This would bring total funding to 23.3 million, and then an additional 1 million for the home visit program, bringing that program to 4.5 million. So in the area of literacy, the governor is proposing a new program with $155 million. Under this program, we would establish a committee that would be made up of university or academic experts in the field of literacy curriculum. They would evaluate those curriculums and set them into tiers such that those districts that used the higher tiered curriculums would receive a higher payment out of this pot of funds. So it really is trying to incentivize districts to use the higher rated curriculums around the state. The next bullet really is kind of a similar type focus. So this would be a competition with $10 million. We were calling it the READ competition, or Reading Excellence in Advancing District Competition. And this would basically also reward those districts using higher curriculum, and then pay those ISDs or those districts for higher literacy gains, with that top district receiving up to about $500,000. Moving into the third bullet, so we're providing an additional 3.2 million that brings our total funding for literacy coaches across the state to about 45 million. This would be to fund those ISDs that didn't receive additional funds for literacy coaches in the current year budget. And then continuing again, 4 million for the Imagination Library and other similar programs. These are programs that are intended to provide books and other resources to our early learning students. In the area of student supports, so all of these bullets on this slide are actually continuation items. So we are continuing the current year funding for student mental health and school safety. We are continuing to fund that at 300 million. However, what we've been able to do with this budget is we've been able to roll half of that in. So this has been a categorical that's been funded in the budget over the last several years, but it's been one time. So it creates some uncertainty out in the field. So what we've done here is we've rolled 150 million into the ongoing bucket and then 150 would remain in the one-time bucket. We're also proposing to continue the My Kids Back on Track program with $150 million. And then continuing the next two bullets, transportation reimbursements would be funded at $125 million. And then declining enrollment assistance supports would be funded at another $71 million. Both of those would be funded out of the reserve funds that were set up this current year for those purposes. Under the Healthy Meals for All, so as you all know, we have supported the Healthy Meals for All program in this year's budget. We've it's been very, very popular, wildly successful, such that we are making some cost adjustments in this budget. So we are bringing that program funding up from 160 to 200 million. We are taking $30 million from the reserve fund, so 170 of that would be funded with ongoing money, with the intention that we would then use the reserve fund in the following years to fully fund that program. And then we are also continuing $50 million for our before and after school programs. These are funded in the current year budget. We are having also higher uptake than our funds are available for these programs, so they've also been wildly popular in the field. We are maintaining that as ongoing funding in the budget. And then lastly, continuation of educator supports. So we are proposing the first two bullets. We're proposing to reinstate. We funded this in the FY23 budget, the educator mentorship programs, as well as additional Grow Your Own dollars. So these would be programs that would be intended to help districts mentor and bring up staff within their buildings that want to be teachers. And then we're also continuing supports for the By Educator student stipend program as well as the Educator Fellowship program. Each of those funded $50 million for the stipends and $25 million for the fellowship. CTE programming, so we're continuing $10.4 million which was funded in the one-time bucket in the current year budget, continuing to fund that ongoing. And then we're continuing $15 million for the CTE equipment purchase program. An additional $40 million is set aside for the FAFSA completion program. This would be intended to be used over 4 years at $10 million per year. And then a new program being proposed with $20 million would be a new pilot program to connect high schoolers with training and career opportunities in key industries throughout the state. So this next slide just touches on the MIPSERS adjustments that are reflected in the budget. So there are two components to MIPSERS. One is the pension side and one is the OPEB, or the other post-employment benefits side, or retiree health care. Over the years, so we began pre-funding OPEB in 2012, so previous aggressive reforms and funding mechanisms have helped us achieve nearly 100%. At the 2022 valuation, we were 99.2% funded on the OPEB side, and with the 23 and the 24 annual contributions being made, we anticipate this will be over 100% funded. The other kind of competing factor here is that there was a statutory floor that was enacted by this legislature in 2018 that basically says our annual contributions can't be less than the previous year. That floor was triggered in 2020, so since 2020 we've been paying higher than what would otherwise be required for these annual required payments. On the pension side, those payments continue. We are not recommending any changes to benefits. We're not rating funds. We're continuing to make our contributions on the pension side, and that is well on track to be paid by 2038, which was the initial plan. So on the second bullet on that page, so that the savings on the first bucket, so that is reflective of about 670 million in total savings. In this budget, 640 million of that is reflected in the K-12 budget, and then there's an additional 40 million that's reflected in the community college budget, as they are also MIPSR's entities. The second bullet on here is really just kind of a reimbursement. We are taking 100 million of those dollars, and we are reimbursing colleges and K-12 districts. The K-12 portion is 94.3 million, as you see on the second bullet here, just to help those districts that are participating in MIPSRs, help offset those costs of the retirement system. And then the last bullet here, continuation of 11.9 million to help ISDs offset their MIPSR's costs. This is included in the current year budget. Under new investments, this next slide, so we're proposing a new $5 million for student success strategies, which are systems to work through the state's data hubs to provide early warnings, indicators, or systems for students. So these would be things like grades in particular areas, absenteeism, those types of things, just to help. These would be focused on students in grades 6 through 12, just to help them succeed in their later years in high school. Another $1 million is being proposed, so we've got a lot of funds going in for preschool. We got a lot of items and programs in for literacy, so this would be $1 million to support the Michigan Education Research Institute. This is a partnership between MSU and U of M to do education-related research. This is not new necessarily. They are a functioning entity as we speak, but we are tasking them to do a little bit more research in the areas of literacy, preschool outcomes, educator workforce. So we've kind of tagged them and tasked them with additional areas to research. And then an additional $1 million for the peer mentoring and support program. This would be a mentoring program that would be offered in one community with the hopes then that it would be replicated throughout the state. The last chart we have here in the slide deck before we can open it up to questions, if the committee has questions, but this is really just this is also a dense chart, but this is really just kind of a depiction of the school aid fund balance sheet. So on the top section there is the revenues. Revenues total $21.6 billion, and then the bottom area are the expenditures. So we have $20.7 billion in ongoing expenditures, an additional $953 million in one-time, for a total of $21.6 billion. This leaves $12.2 billion at the end of FY25. So with that, again, Madam Chair, I appreciate the opportunity, and we are happy to take questions.
Thank you. We do have questions. First off, Rep. Colazar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here today for your testimony. I'm looking at the House fiscal analysis, and I want to make sure that I understand. The governor's proposal would have the school transportation fund ending in 2026 at the proposed levels. Is that correct? And if so, what plan does the governor have to continue supporting those school districts and students?
Yeah, so that was pre-funded with some funding for beginning in this fiscal year. So we're kind of spending from that reserve fund right now. So I do believe after 26, the amount that was put in that reserve fund would likely be exhausted. So I think there would have to be some discussions about some ongoing availability of funds beyond that date.
Alex, is your mic on?
It is, but maybe I should scooch
Okay.
closer to it.
Thanks. Thank you.
Did you get any of that, or should I go again? Okay. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so like I said, I mean, that's currently funded from a one-time reserve fund that was intended to fund multiple years. So I think once that reserve fund is depleted, which I think fiscal year 26 is the right year, if my head math is right, there'd have to be a discussion about the availability of ongoing funding.
So just to be clear, so at this point, we don't know how that would be funded, and we would need to figure that out in the future?
It isn't currently, not currently built into any of the ongoing funding streams.
Okay.
Thank you. Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. My question we have a lot of things that sort of dovetail in the education budget. On the continuing education supports, I guess my question is sort of a why and a how with this. We have the educator mentorship program, $50 million there. My question is number one, how does that work? But then number two is why is it in a statewide budget and not in a local contract where the unions are negotiating? I have extra responsibilities because I'm mentoring, therefore, why aren't the local unions fighting for this, and why is it coming from a state level saying this is what must happen?
Yeah, I guess I would just respond to that we are, we were, in the last few years, we've been in kind of a critical shortage. We've had a workforce shortage across the state. We don't have the teachers that we need, the administrators that we need. We are starting to see, I think these programs are working over the last 2 years. We've actually got an increase in the number of educators in our state, which is a good thing. So these are all programs that are really intended. We were looking at, critical shortages. And so these programs are just help to increase those educators across the state.
Thank you. Representative DeBoer.
Just wondering if the non-public schools are eligible to apply for the school safety grants for their schools like they were in the previous budget?
They are not included in this proposal.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the continued investment in career exploration, and I do think it's important for teachers to support each other and to have a way to build into each other. Thank you.
Thanks. Representative Steckloff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have two questions. Regarding Section 25M and 31A, can you explain the difference between these two sections, and why is there a new structure to this category? For example, why is it competitive instead of being part of a bigger pot and being distributed normally?
So I think the thought there is twofold. I mean, so 31A, right now, the existing 31A, I mean, there are some restrictions on how the districts can use it. I mean, it is generally more targeted towards kind of the academic needs and some of those types of interventions, whereas this newer program, it's more that whole child approach. So there's the social aspect, the social, emotional, physical, and academic needs. So I think it's maybe broader uses, a little more flexibility in addressing some of these deep poverty needs that some students face. And I think the reason, too, that it was kind of more on a grant basis was that I think there was some thought if going out on a formula, it might be sprinkled in a way too thin, that maybe it can't be as impactful, in some areas. So, I mean, there's some districts who might have some innovative ideas on how they can address some of these issues, so maybe that could inform future policy in this area as well. So I think those were kind of the two thoughts on why a new section was created.
Thank you. And one more question, if you don't mind, Madam Chair. This question might have to be answered by Dr. Rice, so I don't know if we're going to have to hold it on. We allocate funding for specific programs. And on the ground, we've seen that these funds are not being used for those specific programs. They're being used for additional things. So there's an idea of putting money out there to begin to research why those funds are not being used for what they were specifically used for. This is a question for Dr. Rice, but I didn't know if the new section for Michigan Education Research Institute, that $1 million could be used to see where that funding is actually going.
Yeah, obviously I don't want to talk for Dr. Rice, but just a couple things to that. So I think absolutely, to your point about using the $1 million for the research, for some of those things, that's really what that is intended to do, is to see what we're funding and what we're getting with those investments. The other thing that we've done in a couple sections, I know the mental health and school safety, that one stands out in my mind because we've added additional reporting requirements just to see, we just want to see what those funds are being used for by the districts at the local level. So I would agree with both of those points that you've made, yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Question from Representative Price on Zoom.
Thank you, Chair Weiss, and thank you, whoever just gave me permission to unmute. Grateful that I'm able to participate remotely today. So my question is related to infrastructure. I am very grateful that we are taking our constitutional responsibility of educating Michigan's children more seriously. I'm grateful for the proposed increase in per pupil funding and literacy support. What I'm not hearing enough of is infrastructure. We know that many of our buildings are old and haven't been maintained appropriately over time. I have schools in my district where they have to cancel for cold days and hot days because they don't have the infrastructure required to keep the kids safely in school. And when I ask the principals, what do you need? It's, a safe bathroom facility, safe drinking water. So I'm wondering what proposed solutions there are to invest in the failing infrastructure in many areas of our state. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. Great point, Representative Price. To that point, so we did fund a $20 million infrastructure study that's actually in the works right now. We just don't have the results. So this would be a study that would look at school facilities statewide and kind of gauge where those needs are. And we have $250 million set aside in the infrastructure fund that would then we would be able to tap into once that study is complete. But there are, obviously, as you've noted, there are, huge needs throughout the state. But we are kind of in the process here of just trying to gauge what those, where those needs are and what they are. So, but that's a great point.
Thank you. Representative Mearman.
Thank you, Chair Weiss. I guess to bounce back to the MIPSers discussion, recently it's been funded fairly well, and I appreciate that. But if we look back in the decade past, we underfunded, and that's one reason we're in this hole in the MIPSers in particular. So to me, it would seem like paying an extra mortgage down, a mortgage payment on your home really helps you at the end, because that money then can be used for from kids 10 years from now. So it seems like we're being a little short-sighted pulling that money back. That's my opinion. Maybe you can expand on that a little bit more. I understand you're talking about OPEB and the difference between that and retirement.
I guess my response to that is, so that's, $670 million. There are a couple of things I've been hearing out in the field that if we were by chance, if the market were to fall or something were to happen, and we do fall under 100% funded, we are not proposing that we don't pay that. And so, this would take a statutory change. It would take a statutory change to the MIPSers Act to reset the floor, so that if we ever fall below 100% funded, that floor would then be triggered again, and we would have to adjust the budget to make those payments. And so, that's one thing I've been hearing, is that we could fall below and we would, not have the funds, but we would have to make those adjustments. The other thing, I know there is a philosophical, debate around whether those funds should be used now or later. If we were to use $670 million and pay it towards the debt that's due in 2038, it would make a difference. It would make a difference maybe on your, the 30th year of your mortgage. It might shave off part of that time. We're talking about investing. The governor has instead decided to invest those dollars into today's classrooms. Our classrooms, we are talking about our 4-year-olds today. Our 4-year-olds will actually be graduating from high school in 2038 when that debt comes due. And so, you know, I think in her mind, this is, you really don't have a better return on investment. Otherwise, you really have lost almost a generation of those students. And so she has chosen to invest those dollars today.
Thanks.
All right. I just have a quick follow-up on that, because I had a kind of a technical question on the MIPSers piece. I see the 670 number a lot. I was trying to like figure out the exact number, and I have not been able to. I know you mentioned it was around 40 million for community colleges. I thought when I added it up, it was more of like 675 was the amount. Can you kind of just like walk through the exact numbers there for how you got to that 670 number?
Yeah, so it kind of gets complicated with some actuarial, changes in there as well. But basically comparing what the state would owe, assuming the floor isn't changed in legislation, to what is estimated the state would owe. The difference there is $680 million. Now the 670 then, there's basically $10 million to say that this remaining 0.8%, so we're 99.2% funded, so that remaining 0.8% is roughly $10 million. So that kind of backs out of the 680 that we would have otherwise had to contribute. So that's where the 670 comes from. Now MIPSers, it's shared across K-12 and libraries and community colleges. So the savings, it's partially realized on the K-12 side of things and partially realized on the community college side of things. So there's, I guess, several kind of input variables that go into that. So the numbers in the budget kind of mask some of those sort of back-end calculations that change that 680 into the 670.
Thank you. That is helpful.
It's-
I don't know if there's a way that we could maybe get that breakdown sent to us
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Just as helpful to have, to understand it. Thank you. Representative Wilson, and then we have one more question after that, and then we're gonna cut off questions so we can get to the next presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just real quick, you talked about the success of the breakfast and lunch program and how everyone's loving that. The increase of ongoing dollars from 160 to 170 million, is that, was the 160 more of an estimate and 170 is probably more of the target that's it's actually going to cost? And then that extra 30 million, could you explain that one more time for me?
Sure. So we currently, in the current year budget, and this is the first year of our Healthy Meals for All program, so that was really an estimate. So we put 160 million in the current year budget. We've also got we had 25 million appropriated in last year's budget to help schools that were starting in the fall. So those schools that started August, September-ish, they would have access to some funds at the beginning of the year. So the total of those, so we expect probably to spend about close to $200 million this year in the Healthy Meals program. So we are proposing a supplemental to fully fund that program for the current year and then carrying that increase forward. So it's a total of $200 million. The 160 was, like I said, it was really an estimate. It was the first year, and nobody really had a good sense of what that would cost. And so coming in, we're at 200 million. We knew that it was an estimate at the time, so when we negotiated this current year budget, we put some money aside into a school meals fund and then funded a portion of the current year budget with one-time dollars out of that fund. So what this budget does is it increases the overall appropriation to 200 million, increases the ongoing funding to 170, takes 30 million out of the reserve to total that 200 million, if that makes more sense.
It does, yeah, thank you.
Representative Green?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In the previous question about MIPSers, you had mentioned what the governor was thinking and why she wanted to do what she did. Can you get us some of those talking points? Because consistently, as I'm meeting with my teachers and as I'm meeting with the retirees, they are consistently talking to me about the commitment we made to them. And so I'm trying to figure out how to say this properly, because we made a commitment to them, yet we want to invest over here and we're diverting money. And when we're explaining, we're losing. And so if you can help us get that information to them, because it's a lose-lose situation. I would love to have the governor come talk to the same people that I'm talking to and explain to them why we are diverting money out of their retirement. in securing their retirement, as they talk about wanting to make sure that the pensions are available for the next generation of teachers as well. And I guess as a second follow-up, can you explain why those individuals who are not part of the public school system, why they are not allowed to be part of the lunch system or the school safety system? Their parents pay taxes, they pay property taxes, they pay everything, and they pay on top of it, but it seems like we're looking and we're splitting and dividing students, saying you're available for safety and food, but you're not part of the favored group because you are, in our mind, something that they're not. And so it's very frustrating trying to explain to the average Joe why this person is preferred and this person is not. So if you can give me some of that information, I would greatly appreciate it.
Sure, we could, yeah, absolutely. We can follow up with that information for you.
All right, I kind of lied. I have one more question.
Okay.
And this will be the last one.
Okay.
So when you were kind of going through the increases, both the 2.5% for foundation and then some of the other weighted increases, is that based on inflation? And what did you use, what percentage did you use to calculate inflation for that?
It is not based necessarily on inflation. It does, however, mirror, I think, inflation at the January consensus was about 2.6%. So it is roughly inflation.
And that's projected for what we project inflation will be in 2025,
25,
right? Yeah,
yes,
okay.
I believe.
Thank you. All right. Thank you both so much. And if you could send any of that follow-up to us, and we'll make sure we get that out to all of our members.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you. All right. Next up, we have a presentation by the Michigan Department of Education on the fiscal year 25 MDE executive budget recommendation. And so can I call up Dr. Superintendent Dr. Michael Rice and Diane Golazinski from MDE to present. Dr. Rice, whenever you're ready, you can kick us off.
That was a gift to all of you who couldn't hear me initially. Good morning, Chair Weiss, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I am joined today by Dr. Susie Carnell, our Chief Deputy Superintendent, Dr. Diane Golzinski, Deputy Superintendent of Finance and Operations, as well as behind me, Dr. Cheryl Kennedy, our Legislative Liaison, Mr. Spencer Simmons, Director of the Office of Financial Management, and Ms. Kelly Siciliano-Carter, Director of the Office of Strategic Planning and Implementation. The last two state budgets have been very supportive of public education. Indeed, the fiscal year 23 and 24 budgets are the most extraordinary for public education in the post-Proposal A year of the last 3 decades, thanks to the governor and state legislature for their work on these historic budgets. That said, the governor, legislative leadership, and the State Board of Education and I all know that we continue to play catch-up based on 2 decades of underfunding of public education. We focus our work subcommittee on the top 10 strategic education plan, which the State Board of Education approved in August of 2020. It has 8 goals. These are the 8 goals. We focus on upstream and downstream goals. Upstream resource goals are addressing the teacher shortage and addressing adequate and equitable school funding. They affect everything else downstream. Similarly, the developmental upstream goals, expanding early childhood education, the improvement of early literacy, goals 1 and 2, affect everything else downstream, as does goal 3, the improvement of health, safety, and wellness. They affect goals 4, 5, and 6, the expansion of secondary school programming, the improvement of graduation rates, and the improvement of post-secondary credential attainment rates. So the fiscal year 25 state school aid executive budget recommendation We're going to go Goal 8, Goal 7, and then 1 through 6 in order. You know, Subcommittee, that different children have different needs have different costs. This has been the premise behind the budgets that the governor has sent to you the last 2 years, that you've approved and sent back to her for signature the last 2 years. We appreciate the 10.4% increase over the last 2 years in foundation allowance. We particularly appreciate the increases in categorical funding, because as different children have different needs, different costs, it's important that we fund not simply the heads, the number of children, but their needs. And so we appreciate the additional funding for at-risk students, for students who are socioeconomically disadvantaged, children who are English learners. We appreciate also the increase in funding for students with disabilities. Transportation reimbursement for general education students. You may recall last year, Subcommittee, that this was not in the executive budget recommendation. We encouraged you from the department side to put in place this element because it's a matter of funding equity for rural school districts. They bear disproportionately high transportation costs, adversely affecting the classroom, and we felt that this was a matter of rural funding equity. We would ask you to continue it. We're delighted to see it in the executive budget recommendation in fiscal year 25. We note simply that that $350 million fund would be pulled down to simply $100 million after this fiscal year if this proposal is approved. We appreciate the funding for consolidation and infrastructure, and we would ask for a boilerplate change to permit some of that money to be used in an emergency situation. $90 million in competitive grants. Rep. Steckloff asked about this, I believe. I would simply ask the subcommittee to consider this funding being done in formula rather than by competition. We have too many grant categories as it is, and the proliferation of grant categories does not improve student achievement. You really need to consolidate the number of grant categories. It's a tremendous burden on local school districts. It pulls time away from focusing on young people. It's not that we are opposed to the funding, to the purpose. It's not the point. Point is simply make it simpler for local school districts to access these dollars. In general, subcommittee, I ask you to focus on 4 things. 1, that per pupil foundation allowance percentage increases have to be greater than inflationary percentage increases each year if we are going to make up ground relative to inflation, if we are not simply going to keep up with inflation. That's number 1. 2, major categorical percentage increases, and by major categorical percentage increases, I'm talking about students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged students, students with disability, English learners, have to be greater than per pupil foundation allowance percentage increases if you are, subcommittee, going to be working on the equity side of adequate and equitable school funding. The general education transportation reimbursement needs to continue to be funded. That is a matter of primarily, not exclusively, but primarily rural funding equity. And then finally, the legislature, again, needs to reduce the number of small grants, competitive or otherwise. The proliferation of grant categories doesn't drive student achievement. There's no evidence of that whatsoever in the literature. Increase in the numbers of certified teachers in areas of shortage. This is goal 7 of the state's top 10 strategic education plan. Prior to fiscal year 21 subcommittee, we had precisely nothing in the State School Aid Act to address a raging teacher shortage. We got small dollars in fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22. The department in the fall of 21 recommended to the governor and the legislature hundreds of millions of dollars of teacher shortage rectification measures. We're delighted that the governor, the legislature came together, supported many of those in fiscal year 23, $575 million in fiscal year 23, $448 million in fiscal year '24. We're supportive of the governor's recommendation to add $50 million in new Grow Your Own funding, supportive of the additional $50 million on top of the $50 million in fiscal year '24 for mentoring and induction. Rep. DeBoer, you know as an educator that simply because someone hires you, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can do the job. A number of us have been teachers at first year, that second year. It can be very, very difficult. So it's important that we provide mentoring, and not simply mentoring for our new teachers, but our new counselors, our new superintendents, and for that matter, our new school board members. We're supportive of these recommendations of the governor. We ask simply for one reflection in this area, Goal 7 of the Top 10 Strategic Education Plan, to address the teacher shortage. We ask for consideration for mandatory new superintendent mentoring and for mandatory new school board member training as well. When you are in the beginning, the infancy of your work in a given area, you need training without exception. I don't care how driven you are, how smart you are, how experienced, how focused. You need that training, that mentoring, and to volunteer for it is to run the risk of people assuming that you are less capable because you are being mentored. To have to do something mandatorily has a different feel to it, a different vibe to it. Goal 1 of the state's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan is the expansion of early childhood learning opportunities. Here you can see the 118% increase in GSRP funding over the last 3 years, enormously supportive of universally accessible preschool, and supportive of these boilerplate changes in GSRP. We appreciate the continued increase in funding. We ask you to stay focused, subcommittee, on 2 issues as we expand GSRP preschool. 1, we ask you to stay focused on quality as we seek to expand the quantity of young people in universally accessible preschool. And relatedly, all early childhood programs are not the same. While all deserve our support, the lines between types of early childhood programming should not be blurred. Second goal of the Top 10 Strategic Education Plan is the improvement of early literacy achievement, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Carnell to do the honors for that.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. Good morning. We appreciate in the executive budget recommendation the continued support of literacy in Section 35A, including the proposed increase of $3.2 million to support literacy coaches at the ISDs. We are also supportive of the funds for professional learning in LETRS. LETRS is the language essential for teachers of reading and spelling. Next slide. We are also supportive of the continuation of My Kids Back on Track, similar to the fiscal year '23 funding. We are supportive of the $150 million proposed for this program, which aims to provide additional academic assistance to students at risk of falling behind their peers and help for preparing them for post-secondary education. The executive budget recommendation has $155 million to create a committee to oversee literacy achievement through MyLeap in collaboration with higher ed institution. This committee must critically evaluate literacy professional development or professional learning and rank literacy curricula. MDE has a concern about these proposals in Section 35M and 35N that add to a proliferation of grants, and in one case, a competitive grant, represents a proposed proposed infringement upon MDE's work, and they will also lead to a delay in funding and confusion in the field and will not increase literacy achievement. Instead, we would like to see funds for this particular program pay for lowering class size in high-poverty elementary classrooms and additional literacy training for our educators.
Thank you, Dr. Carnell. Goal 3 of the state's top 10 strategic education plan is the improvement of health, safety, and wellness of all learners. You've already heard about the Michigan School Meals program. Strongly appreciative of the support of the governor and the legislature for this program. With respect to children's mental health, in fiscal year 2018, there was precisely nothing in the State School Aid Act for children's mental health. And in the ensuing few years, there were dollars added initially for Section 31N funding, and then for Section 31O and P and 31AA. $31 million seems like a lot of money until you divide it up among 1.4 million public school children, in which case it becomes $20 per child. There's substantially more in the State School Aid Act for children's mental health and school safety. We appreciate this enormously. It's long overdue. We ask for your strong consideration of making at least a portion of this funding recurring. These issues are not pandemic created. They may have been pandemic exacerbated, but they were not pandemic created, and the funding needs to be enduring funding for enduring issues of our young people and our schools. Goals 4 and 5 of the state's top 10 strategic education plan, the expansion of secondary learning opportunities for all students, the increase in the percentage of all students who graduate from high school. We group these together because we really feel as if it's important to improve substantially our career and technical education offerings in the state. We're supportive of the governor's proposal for a key industries pilot at $20 million, as well as the continuation of these funding sources under Section 61B, C, and D. But we asked the subcommittee to provide incentive funding to local and intermediate school districts to open new high-quality CTE programs in underserved areas. Chair, we asked for greater opportunity for awareness and exploration into elementary and middle schools, greater CTE development opportunities in 9th and 10th grade as kids are trying to figure out why they're in school. It's important that they have the opportunity to understand all the careers that are associated with their study in school. They realize that they're interested in something. They realize that they need the math, they need the science in order to be successful in that area. They plug into school to a greater extent because they realize what they're going to do with school. We ask for more opportunities across the state with fewer CTE deserts. There are 108,000 or so young people last year who benefited from CTE. 45,000 of those were so-called CTE completers. That is to say, they went through an entire program of CTE study, not a single course, but an entire program. Those are good numbers. They can be much better numbers in the state. And I appreciate the support of Rep. DeBoer and others who have been working with us on fleshing out what we can do to expand CTE in the state. This is an area where we can improve our standing and our work with young people. So the sixth goal is the increase in the percentage of adults with a post-secondary credential. And I want to really tie these three goals together, 4, 5, and 6. If we expand CTE programming in the state, we're going to do better in terms of graduation rates for kids who don't know why they're in school, who figure it out when they take a CTE course or courses. You drive CTE programming, you drive that secondary school program expansion, that's goal 4. You drive goal 5, which is graduation rate. You drive goal 6, which is post-secondary credential attainment rate. That's the governor's 60 by 30 goal. 60% of all adults ages 25 through 64 with a post-secondary credential by 2030. Those are linked. To do better with CTE is to do better with graduation rate, is to do better with post-secondary credential attainment rate. We also think that increased investment in Grow Your Own programming is not simply helpful as a CTE measure, as a graduation rate measure, but also in terms of addressing the teacher shortage as well. And now to talk a little bit about the department budget, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Diane Golzinski, but I'm going to preface this with just a couple of thoughts. When we talk about the department staff, everybody thinks they know the department, a little bit like a blind man thinks he knows an elephant. Well, what you know is you know the part of the element that you're touching, the elephant that you're touching, no more than that. The department is multifaceted. Few know this. We certify more than 197,000 individuals. We recertify staff. Teacher and counselor reciprocity, sketches, Grow Your Own programs for support staff and students, teacher loan repayment, ed prep standard setting, ed prep institution accreditation, rural credentialing, hub establishment, school transportation, mentoring and induction standards and grant establishment, CTE, federal grants management, state grants management, pupil accounting, school safety and bullying prevention, children's mental health, school nutrition in and out of school hours, student attendance and engagement support for schools and districts, administrative law. My special gift to you, subcommittee members, is that I will not read the second long list, nor will I embellish after those two lists. Suffice it to say, however, that the department does an enormous amount with very few people. For at least a decade, MDE has been responsible for more than 20% of the state's budget, with approximately 1% of the state's workforce. For example, in the fiscal year 23 budget, prior to the advent of MyLeap, MDE was responsible for the vast majority of the State School Aid Act, approximately $21.2 billion, 23% of the state's total budget, with 1% of the state's workforce. Dr. Golzinski.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. Good morning. In fiscal year 24, the current fiscal year in which we are in, the department's budget is $647 million. In the governor's executive recommendation for fiscal year 25, that number is $163 million. While that is a significant decrease, it's important to recognize that that decrease is primarily related to $414.5 million in federal child care payments that go to child care providers on behalf of parents. Those funds now will flow through MyLeap instead of MDE. Also, a transfer of 77 Office of Great Start FTEs and the removal of $55 million in one-time appropriations, the largest of which was for the Michigan School for the Deaf dormitory. We are appreciative of FTEs for the summer EBT food benefits program, expanding comprehensive mental health system efforts, CTE administration, next slide, thank you, grants management administration, school infrastructure and consolidation, as well as an ongoing recommendation to move from non-recurring to recurring for the Poet Laureate program. The MDE FTEs in FY24 are 640.5, with the executive recommendation providing 572.5. This net number is generated with the movement of those 77 FTEs from MDE to MyLeap and the proposed 11 FTEs added to the department in the governor's executive recommendation.
So, Madam Chair, members of the committee, we appreciate your subcommittee. We appreciate your attention. We appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you all for your presentation. We very much appreciate it. First up, Representative Green.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Dr. Rice and the doctors for presenting today. I appreciate your goals, the presentation on the goals. Goal number 3 says to improve the health, safety, and wellness of all learners. Can you please define the term all?
Is the question, does that include non-publics?
No, the question is it all learners or is it only public school learners?
So periodically, Rep. Green, I'm reminded that my job is superintendent of public instruction, not non-public instruction. That said, if you want to ask, am I supportive of particular dollars, particularly for mental health and school safety going to the non-public community, I'm happy to answer that question. Would you like to ask that one?
I'm just wanting to make sure that we have the same definitions of the same words. So if all means all, I'm happy. If all means only a portion of our learners, then I just want to make sure that we're talking apples to apples.
Sure. So I think all means, I think in certain contexts, all will have one meaning versus a different meaning. We're clearly not funding tuition of non-public school students the way we are for public school students. That's something we wouldn't be supportive of. In an era where we've had profound mental health challenges among our children, where we've had two very significant tragedies within our state, at Oxford and at MSU, I think all means all with respect to Section 31AA funding.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Thank you. Representative Steckloff.
Thank you, Dr. Rice. This is going to go off the question I asked earlier. We keep talking about school safety and children's mental health. On the ground, this funding is not going to that. What guardrails do we have in place to make sure that school districts are putting this funding where it's supposed to go?
Sure. So we have grant criteria, number one. We are able to ask auditors of local school districts to look into the use of particular grant dollars during their financial audits, number two. We're also able to ask ISDs to look into the use of those grant dollars as well. If you know a particular district or districts that's straying, we're happy to look at it. It's hard to chase a ghost.
I have 5 school districts,
Yeah.
and I don't think, we can talk more offline,
Okay.
but this money is not going to that, and I'm extremely concerned about that because we can only allocate the dollars, we can't chase it. So how often do those audits happen? And if we need to continue to do more audits, what is the cost to hire more auditors?
So every local school district, every ISD has the responsibility to get an annual financial audit. And the audit pulls expenditures from particular programs, sort of random pulls, and we're able to reach out first to local school districts if we think that there are issues with spending, to tell them, and we do this on a daily basis. I mean, on a daily basis, we're telling local school districts, you're able to do this, you're not able to do this, you're able to do this, you're not able to do this, but we're not doing the day-to-day work in the local school districts. It's one thing on the planning side, it's another thing on the effectuation side. But we're then able to go to an ISD or to the auditor and ask them to look into whatever the grant program is of question. And we've disallowed expenditures. The fact of the matter is we've disallowed both state and federal expenditures at times.
All right, thank you.
Yep, you bet.
Thank you. Representative Beeson.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. It's great that I'm back on this committee, Dr. Rice, because I was here when you got hired in 2019 and 2020. I asked a question because I have a sister that does the GRSP and the home study up in Boyne, and I have another sister that does all the negotiating and the teaching in Midland. And I continue to ask the same question. I need to see the ranking since you've taken over this lead. You keep saying the top 10, and you gave me a time frame. I want to know accountability. Like, when are we going to see this? I would like the ranking from when you took in 20, 21, 22, 23, and show me where our schools are going, and I need to see it, because 10 years seems like a long time to change our school system around. And this, if you guys can show me some ranking that we're doing it, then it's easier to get behind it, and I'll be here. Now that the terms have changed, I can actually hold you accountable. I'm going to be on this committee long enough to hold everybody accountable that says, hey, we can do this. I need to see it, even for my sisters that teach.
Well, I don't want to get in the way of family matters. And I can't speak to what's going on in the Beeson Thanksgiving dinners, but let me just share a few thoughts. Evaluating education has a number of different components to it. So for example, you mentioned one of your sisters is involved in the Great Start Readiness Program. The Great Start Readiness Program is ranked #1 nationally, has been for the last 5 years. #1 nationally in quality. So that's an example of an element of public education. Graduation rates. Our graduation rates have gone up 9 of the last 11 years. And we are about to release graduation rates for 2023. I'm not going to make a spoiler alert. What I am going to say is stay tuned for that release. So those are 2 examples of metrics at the beginning of public education and near the end of public education of how we're doing. Top-ranked GSRP quality, graduation rates that have increased 9 of 11 years, with the 12th year pending. Every state board meeting includes a focus on at least one of the goals of the state's top 10 strategic education plan. November included a look at all of those 8 goals. So happy to share that presentation with you. But I would say it's not a single metric. It's hundreds of metrics. And we share on a wide range of those metrics. So you can take a look at that. Happy to continue the conversation with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a quick question. I had heard from a couple of school districts, and I don't know if this is across the board or if it's just a few, that have not received their My Kids Back on Track funding yet for this current fiscal year. Do you know what the status of that one is? And is there potentially going to be a need for allowing continued, work project beyond the next few years for some of those dollars if they haven't been able to get out the door yet?
So I will say that given the amount of funds that some of our districts are trying to spend down, that is to say, with respect to pandemic relief, there's still a lot of ESSER 3 money in certain districts, and these other funds are coming in. So I do think to work project those dollars could be helpful in some districts. For many districts, not so much, but in some districts, yes. Every district didn't apply for those funds. We got applications from more than 500 of those school districts.
And was, for the districts that did apply, is that being prorated out to equal the 150 million, or are you doing another round of applications?
It was being prorated, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. I don't see any more questions. So thank you again, Dr. Rice. Thank you,
Thank you.
doctors, for being here. Appreciate your presentation. And again, just want to thank the Michigan Department of Education and the State Budget Office for being here today to talk about the budget. We are very much looking forward to getting into this work. And our entire committee is looking forward to working with both the department, the governor's team, as well as the Senate to come up with the best possible budget that we can to serve all children, however we define all children, TBD, across our state. Thank you so much. Thank you. And without any other business before the subcommittee is adjourned.